of Debt Nation, where we are busy putting death out of business. And my name is Steele Archer. I'm going to be your host through this Democratic National Debate topic tonight. And we've got Ben Zion, as always. Thank you very much, Ben Zion. And we're counting down to your March 4 campaign in Chicago. Very excited about that. And the VP, Charlie Cam. We're also very excited to have you here, so always excited to have you here. But before we cross over to them to reaction to the Democratic National Convention, we'll quickly thank our sponsor, Thrivous. Thanks very much, Thrivous, for sponsoring this episode. You know what to do. The competition rules are in the description. The competition rules are in the description. The more people that share, the more Thrivous you're going to get. So that starts at $5, goes exponentially to $160. And the prizes are getting larger as more people are sharing, more people are waking up to the best deal on the internet. Also, thanks to I Am Transhuman, that's David Kelly's I Am Transhuman campaign, for sponsoring this event. Thank you very much, David. All right, so the Democratic National Convention happened. It's come, it's gone, and the field is shaking up. The hollow Pete Buttigieg, being hollow as always, he's got no real policy idea, no real policy plan. Joe Biden slipping, Joe Biden failing and slipping. His steam train is running out of steam. Elizabeth Warren making up some ground there. But we've got to cross over to Ben Zion, Charlie Cam, for the reaction from a longevity and from the United States transhumanist perspective on the Democratic National Convention and the future state of the Democratic Party. Welcome, gentlemen. Ben Zion, you watched the debate in full. So what happened?
Yes. Well, the consensus among pundits is that Elizabeth Warren stomped on everyone and had a very strong showing, and that's in evidence as the first words out of her mouth were decrying Mayor Bloomberg, former mayor and a mega billionaire Bloomberg, as a what did she say, Charlie? She said.
She said that she was very clever in that the first question was posed to Bernie Sanders about what he thought of Bloomberg, and then after he finished, they got the rebut from Bloomberg, and then as he was finishing, Warren basically interjected herself because she really wasn't part of that question, but she says, I just want to say that we're going to have a chance tonight to talk about our opponent, a billionaire who calls women horseface and some other derogatory remark, as she said, and then she says, "Oh, and I'm not talking about Donald Trump. I'm talking about Mayor Bloomberg." And then the crowd just went crazy, and that kind of set the tone for the whole evening. Yeah, wow. That all happened within the first few minutes.
Yeah. What a crazy way to start a national.
Besides of other things of this kind. Bloomberg being characterized as somebody who was supporting redlining, these sort of unfair real estate policies, and also supporting stop and frisk, these types of police mandates that negatively affect people in marginalized communities and people of color. And this was kind of true. But I thought that Bloomberg would not necessarily be so much the center of negative attention at this event. And also, he hadn't been in the debate in quite some years. The last debate that he was in 2009, and it was just himself as a strong frontrunner in New York, and it was a two-person affair. So he really wasn't. He didn't seem to be quite prepared for this kind of slugfest.
So with Joe Biden now, crashing out, essentially being ignored on stage, nobody's really attacking him, nobody takes him seriously as a threat anymore, and Buttigieg being hollow, you're coming down to two decisive actors, you're coming down to Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. Elizabeth Warren, the former Republican who just attacks megacorps, and Bernie Sanders, a sort of populist outsider, a Trumpian equivalent on the left of, this outsider figure, independent for the most part. What do you say? How did Bernie and how did Elizabeth Warren go in this debate? How did they perform as opposed to previous debates? And how will the DNC have to react when it sees this sort of stuff? When the Pete Buttigieg insurgency, it might be faltering, and a billionaire play of Mayor Bloomberg might also be faltering as we see. What do we see for the future projection of Bernie and Elizabeth?
Well, it's a good question, and another question that people are posing is this powerful debate performance from Elizabeth Warren going to boost her numbers back into near frontrunner status? It's a 10-point spread that would have to be covered from one event, which is pretty kind of unheard of, I guess. But definitely this sort of Sanders-Warren reform-minded bloc of voters was well represented, I guess, last night in the final view of the thing. Considering that Sanders is the front runner, and also he didn't get a lot of flack. He wasn't the object of his adversary's affection to a high degree in that debate last night. So I mean, I've said for a long time that I think that Sanders and Warren would be an interesting ticket for kind of some of the reasons that we discussed in the pre-interview. That I think that Warren has probably an ability to inspire and whip a Democratic Congress into shape in getting things like something like a public health service, something like a single payer system, and other necessary reforms implemented. And whereas Sanders has the popularity and the populist groundswell, but maybe would tend to operate more as an outsider as president. I think that those two together would be a very powerful ticket. So at present, the electors are equally divided between Buttigieg and Sanders, and Sanders has a big lead in Nevada, has a big lead in California and New York by projections. So these are things to consider. What these kinds of relationships might look like, and who is in a position to challenge the power of those two, or Sanders particularly. I don't know that that Buttigieg has that popularity or that policy acumen, and I think that he'll probably not be at the top of that list in a few days or weeks. What do you think, Charlie?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think you got to keep in mind that money is an important aspect to the running of this, and that means donations. And if people don't see a candidate doing well, scoring at least the top two in these primaries, no one wants to give him money because it's a lost cause. I'm pretty sure that's what motivated someone like Elizabeth Warren to really go harsh this time, because she saw what happened in a previous debate when Klobuchar came out really strong, and she got a pretty good bump in New Hampshire. So, but right now, Sanders is clearly on a trajectory to get the most delegates overall, because if with regard to this Nevada primary, or it's a caucus actually coming up, one of the interesting things that this one offers that was not actually offered by the Iowa caucus, which was a big mess, this one has early voting. and they've already had 4 days of early voting, and they said 77,000 people have already put in their votes for Nevada, and they anticipate they might get a turnout, a total vote of somewhere around 120,000. Well, that means there's only about 50,000 approximately more. And right now, Sanders, according to the polling, is way ahead in Nevada. And if that is reflective of, those first 77,000, then even this debate won't affect that outcome that much. Yesterday's debate, even though he did fairly well, he's likely to win Nevada pretty strongly. And in fact, he's already flown over to California. They said he left, even after the debate, even though they don't have the voting for a few days, because I think he knows he's in the pole position where he's going to get that. And as far as his running mate having Warren, now I agree with Ben that Warren can do things that Sanders, that maybe complements what Sanders is good about. The only thing is, she might serve better in his cabinet if he gets to the point of winning, maybe in other positions more effectively than just being a vice president, which doesn't necessarily have the same kind of strength in what it can do. And there's also the possibility Sanders might want to pick someone that could be more strategic for him as far as getting votes, because remember, the Democratic Party, a big portion of it is the minority faction, which is the blacks and the Hispanic population. And so you might see Sanders looking at someone like Stacey Abrams, who almost won Georgia, which, if he picks her, that's a African-American female who was very popular. That could, complement his ticket and really bring in the black community. Or he might look at somebody like, there's a senator in Wisconsin named Tammy Baldwin, and she's the first openly LGBTQ senator to come out, and she represents Wisconsin. And obviously Wisconsin is considered maybe the main swing district that kind of put it over the top for Trump. So I think there's other people he could consider. I think, Warren would be great too. It's just a matter of strategy and also being true to what he believes in. And both of the ones I named are pretty progressive in their beliefs. So and of course this is saying if Sanders makes it all the way, but in my opinion, Bloomberg had such a poor showing in his first debate that he might not get the kind of votes, because he was rising in the polls for a long time, but that was based on very well-crafted commercials and an advertising campaign. Now that they saw him in person, it's kind of like the same metaphor a lot of people are using. He's like the curtain was taken away, and you could see the guy behind the curtain operating the wizard. You thought he was this all-powerful, amazing guy who was just going to swoop in and take over the debate or whatever. He was going to be the challenger to Trump, but he certainly didn't look like a strong presence there on the debate stage. He looked, especially when they started talking. I don't know, Steele, if you recall, but if you saw, but there was a moment in there where, and it went on for a little bit of time, where they called him out on these non-disclosure agreements he had from women that worked at his organization. That have complained, that filed lawsuits on sexual harassment. And he paid a lot of them off. He did settlements with them. Well, that came out in a big way, which was brought out by Elizabeth Warren on one of her attacks. And she was, by the way, on stage, logistically, she was standing next to him. So she was turning to him saying, well, the question is, what are you going to do? Are you going to let those women released from their non-disclosure agreements so they can say their side of the story? And then he's like, fumbling around with an answer. He's like, well, we had an agreement that nobody wants it to be public. And then Joe Biden, who, was kind of an afterthought at this point, he jumps in and says, hey, all he's got to do is say out loud right now, yes, I'm okay with the non-disclosures being released and then letting them women talk. That's all you got to do. And it just made Bloomberg look so kind of impotent that I just thought, wow, if this is the moderates' hope to take it away from Sanders, this isn't going very well. So that's kind of my assessment from what I saw, and I was reading some of the pundits' reviews the next day. I was like, yeah, that's kind of what the collective consensus is. They don't think Bloomberg's out of it because of the fact that had this been any other candidate, it might have been their farewell, tour or their farewell thing. But he's not the guy who has to rely on donations. Even if he screws up, he'll just say, "Well, we're going to do another $100 million worth of ads and make me look good again for the next debate." Because there is another debate coming up. When is it, Ben? About a week or so?
Yeah. We're at this time of year now where there's more debates coming than previous. So in last year we were having debates once a month, and now they're having debates. What is it? 2 or 3 times a month.
And you can see why with this trajectory, with this increased amount of activity, somebody like Andrew Yang has dropped out. It makes him look good on multiple fronts. It makes him look good like he's not holding back people or campaigns, not wasting campaign money or holding back supporters from actually rallying against Trump, which is what the DNC really would like to do. Who do you think is strong enough at this point to take the charge against Trump? Is it looking more and more like Bernie all the time? Like the DNC keeps failing with their attempts to squash Bernie? Because if you watch Rachel Maddow, who does some okay work every now and again, it's Elizabeth Warren and Bernie are the Glass-Steagall people. I think Tulsi Gabbard is the only other Glass-Steagall person. The Republicans don't even talk about Glass-Steagall. Most of the Democrats, Buttigieg, Joe Biden don't talk about Glass-Steagall. But these two do. And if you know who funds a lot of the Democratic Party, it's a lot of these big mega banks and investment corps. And this is why they don't, they don't like talking about Glass-Steagall, and they like throwing these two out. So if Bernie or if Elizabeth Warren happen to be even somewhat successful, the Glass-Steagall issue is back on the table, and that's kind of what the DNC has been trying to run around. Is there any hope for the DNC to get Glass-Steagall off the table? Ben Zion, Charlie Cam.
Yes. So Glass-Steagall is an act that was regulating commercial banking activities. It was created in the wake of the stock market crash of the last century, and since the Reaganomics era, these kinds of protections have been dramatically weakened.
Bill Clinton.
Yes. Not specifically owing to one person. This is why we are not Democrats and Republicans, because of these corporatist special interests having an inordinate amount of control over our government, and so much so that not only are these matters dramatically underregulated, but more importantly, there's things like a tremendous amount of Pentagon blows, and very little mandate in that two-party system for things like humane economic policies. We used to have a middle class. now we don't. 50% of people are literally working at slave wages. 80% of people are one fender bender away from utter economic ruin. And this is not just like an unhappy accident. This is a result of these folks who have devoted their lives to undermining these regulations, like Glass-Steagall. So this is why, in my view, we should support people like Sanders or Warren to some degree as they make inroads into the halls of power in these organizations, because we basically don't have any faction of this two-party system that serves in that function to see that these things are regulated, to see that the citizens are better served.
How about you, Charlie Camp? What do you see? Do you see Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, either of those? Do you think the whole debate within the Democratic Party will be changed? Do you think that this is dangerous for the DNC?
Not necessarily. I know that that's become a big topic amongst a lot of pundits about the concern that if we now if Bernie becomes the nominee, that somehow we're not, that's going to alienate people. I think that's the same poor logic that was just you put towards Trump. The idea that they had to, the Republicans said, "Oh my God, if Trump's the nominee, Hillary's going to kill him." I mean, how embarrassing is that? And almost every pundit got that wrong. So I think that it speaks a lot to the fact that regardless of how it happens, if Bernie does become the nominee, well, he became the nominee. You can't deny the fact that he was able to pull something off. And I think it would be very silly to just say, oh, he's going to lose. I think I saw the crowds he generates. I think he'll be strong. I think there is a big commitment of the anybody but Trump movement. And they're going to say, well, if it's Bernie, so be it. We're going to just get behind him and we got to get Trump out. And there's also a logic that's slightly, kind of running in the background there, which I think even Ocasio-Cortez had mentioned, is that, regardless of how radical you think about Bernie Sanders' ideas, they're probably not going to get through anyway. I mean, because the Senate has to approve them, and it might not happen. So I think there's some solace that people are going to take in that, and they're going to say, we gotta defeat Trump. So I think whoever the nominee is, whether it's Bernie or somehow it becomes somebody else, I think that the Trump's, I know a lot of people say that he's got a chance to win. I think his chance of winning is a lesser to an extent now, because when he ran the first time, he was more of an unknown quantity. And a lot of independents and people that didn't like Hillary or thought like, hey, this guy's going to blow up Washington. Let's give him a chance. We don't know him. A lot of people only knew him from The Apprentice. And they just thought like, yeah, he says things, but that's just locker room talk. Hey, let's give him a chance. Now they see him. He's like, oh my God, this guy's vulgar, and he's currently dismantling democracy. So I think you've got a lot of people that were independent that maybe could have went, like the people that voted for Obama and then they voted for Trump. I think those people are going to say, you know what, maybe this wasn't a good idea. Let's go with this socialist guy. Maybe that'll do something. I mean, I seriously think that you're going to see that kind of sway. I'm not frightened that Sanders and Warren could destroy the party. I think, if anything, they might be the ones that actually get enough rally behind them to take it away from Trump. But again, I think in these times, given what Trump was able to do, it's really unpredictable, but it's exciting, if nothing else.
Now that
I mean, you have to recognize how much Orwellian doublespeak is going on to characterize somebody like Sanders or Warren as extremists. Now, I'd like to read some policy platforms. One, protect Social Security. Two, extend the minimum wage. Three, provide federal assistance to low-income communities. Four, provide asylum for refugees. Five, improve unemployment benefits. Six, strengthen labor laws. Seven, assure equal pay for workers regardless of sex. This is not Sanders' platform. This is a Eisenhower Republican, 1956 Republican platform. And in those days before we had this obscene corporatist control and micromanagement of the media and fear-mongering from the media that any moves of this kind would undermine the system. That's not undermining the system. It's not undermining outcomes for the citizens. It's undermining that corporatist control, which this mainstream media is very much a party to directly. And so this idea that these people are dangerous, it's just a question of dangerous to whom. It's a question of being dangerous to those some thousands of Beltway insiders and and these sort of corporate keepers in the form of mainstream media. I do think that it is worth mentioning again that somebody like Warren is being a part of this. Part of that fear is I think a fear of not just those changes on the part of these people, but of a disconnect, wherein the citizens have one idea of what they want, and the people who are key decision makers have another way of operating. If that too much of a disconnect there is a recipe for a good deal of confusion, if not outright chaos in policy making. And this is what people are basically talking about when they're talking about something like Civil War 2.0. So it's important to have somebody, I think, people like Warren who can get in there and see that these things are solidified as policy, and as well as having that populist support.
Well, it's interesting. Obviously, the talking points of Andrew Yang are the future. The talking points of the USTP are the future. And of course, you're going to get your right-leaning USTP talking points, your right-leaning Andrew Yang type candidate. That doesn't exist at the moment. There's consolidation on the right under a Trumpian idea. But that won't last forever. So, these talking points are the talking points of the future. So I just want to quickly know, who is, with the dropping out of Andrew Yang, who is the closest life extension candidate that you see? Obviously, all the mainstream talking points that we talk about here for the USTP are gone, pretty much. So you're left with more generic national policies. Ben and then Charlie, who do you guys see as the life extension candidate, the most transhumanist candidate left in the field on the right and the left, excluding the guy over there at Bain Capital, Mitt Romney, who should have run because he would have beat Trump, because he's being attacked by Trump, and that none of the Trumpians could have actually won. But anyway, who do you see as the life extension candidate?
Well, it's important in thinking about this to recognize what happens in practice as a universal super longevity becomes a reality. So you could point to somebody who's been the object of the debate to a high degree, this Sanders-Warren block and the Sanders-Warren personalities, and say these people are not life extensionists. And then you point to somebody like technologists in our world who talk about life extension, but don't support things like publicly funded initiatives or a public health service. Somebody like Sanders is not against life extension. Very few people are afraid of life extension. So the people who are champions of life extension are the people who are doing the organizing and doing the work to see that people are living longer. And the biggest impediment to that is the 70,000 folks. This was mentioned in the debate last night. This Lancet piece, in this substantive medical journal, describing these many deaths, 70,000 a year. Folks are dying because of the gaps in our public health system. We don't have more. And we have this was the biggest area of discussion in this and most of the other debates. So it's easy to say I'm a life extensionist, but actions speak louder than words. If you say I'm a life extensionist, but then support exactly zero initiatives that would improve public health, then you're not a life extensionist. You're just kind of a skilled rhetorician. And we should try to find ways to insert the conversations about techno progress and about universal super longevity into these conversations that people are having in this more generalized economic populist milieu of these candidates that we're discussing. But right now, people in the futurist community, they're largely dancing to a different tune, which is the tune of right libertarians who will like to talk about life extension. And then when you talk about any kind of undertaking to support that, then they give you 1,000 reasons why that undertaking is not worthwhile.
Charlie Cam, who do you see as the life extension candidate apart from the USTP? Obviously, Andrew Yang dropping out. Who do you look to now as the best advocate of life?
Yeah, I did kind of miss Andrew Yang on there the other day. It was he always had a futuristic type look. I would say, and by the way, when Ben was talking about that 70,000, that was coming from Sanders last night. So when you ask the question, who's the most life extensionist candidate, and other than the USTP guys here, I would say the way to look at it isn't necessarily the way you might think, like the way Andrew Yang talks about it, because he's so much about robotics and technology. I get that, and that's something I really love. But if you want to look at it more in a compassionate sense about life extension, when you hear someone like Sanders, who's very passionate on stage, saying, look, there's 70,000 people die because they can't get to the emergency room on time. Well, you can translate that into the idea that, he cares about people not dying, and even to his credit, Bloomberg, if you remember, they were going at him pretty hard about the stop and frisk policy that he implemented in New York. And he said, well, when I look back at we were finding out that there were, when I got into office as the mayor of New York, 650 people died that year. 650 people were murdered that year. And so, my goal was to not have them die. I mean, that's the ultimate. He kind of said, I'm paraphrasing, but he said that's the ultimate goal is to save them from dying, is to save people from dying. And I thought, wow, okay, if you've got, and those are like considered the two front runners at that point. You're talking about Sanders, who's got his compassionate side, and then you got Bloomberg, who stated that he didn't want those deaths to happen, and so he implemented this policy, which he says, well, then it got out of control, and they were, really harassing black people. He says, but at the end of the year, the death rate went down by half, almost 300. When you think like, okay, all right, that policy was bad because it was racist, but if we're talking about life extension, his goal was to save lives, and he said it on stage. And Sanders basically said the same thing. So if we can if these guys become the nominee or whatever, and we have an opportunity somehow to get their ear, it wouldn't be that far of a stretch to say, hey, you want to save lives? Well, look what Aubrey de Grey is doing. Maybe we get the Bloomberg to say, instead of throwing $500 million or $1 billion on a failed campaign, if you really want to save lives, why don't you take a look at this guy? You got $50 billion, give him, $1 billion or some cause that would be really move life extension. So I was happy to hear those two utterances happen just last night from two polarizing or opposite ends of the poll candidates in the Democratic Party that both kind of, opened up or talked about, not liking death. I mean, that was actually something that I guess that we could say makes them sort of in that realm of, life extensionists or transhumanists, as you might want to say.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yes.
it makes. Sorry, Ben.
Oh, no. And I think we should talk about an idea of not just Medicare for all, but a life extension Medicare for all, a public health service that treats aging as a disease, Medicare for all plus, if you will, because there's an awful lot of things that in their implementation of present day public health services, which do by 20th century standards, this is the present day gold standard in the developed world. Every country besides the United States has a public health service, so they don't have the equivalent of 70,000 people dying every year because they just go bankrupt and can't afford health care. That doesn't mean that is itself a perfect system. If we in a sort of Medicare for all plus kind of system, we have a good deal a better understanding of individual citizens' health outcomes, a whole host of prevention minded things, using data science, personalized medicine, using all of the things that people in the life extension community want to have, in addition to these ordinary kinds of 20th century medical interventions that more or less amount to triage, treating people when they're in extremis, rather than preventing these conditions in the first place. And the latter is an awful lot cheaper. And it's entirely feasible when you look at the state of what data science and emerging biomedicine is today. And as all of these things in techno-futurist policymaking, dramatically more feasible as more and more people become literate on the subject and simply ask for the thing. Nobody in history has ever gotten anything except that they asked for it. And right now, people are not asking for this. That is, in all of these debates, that is the thing that was really missing from the discussion, is framing these public health outcomes in these terms. There's an awful lot of discussion of what healthcare should or shouldn't be, but no one is discussing it in the terms of this preventative medicine and use of robust use of emerging technology to create lower costs and better solutions.
Yeah, it's true. And the other thing that left the debate stage when Andrew Yang left was the idea of universal basic income. You won't hear that anymore. Nobody else is talking about that. What do you say to that? You're going to still promote the idea of universal basic income, but so obviously it's not mainstream enough. Obviously the time hasn't come. It's not people aren't ready for it.
Well, people have said of this Yang campaign that the most incredible accomplishment here is creating a parallel economic populist groundswell. The Yang Gang is on par with the sort of Sanders supporters in their fervid support of this set of economic policies, and that is impressive, and that's something that will outlast this year-long campaign that Andrew Yang put on, and that's already in evidence. And we should say of our platform, Charlie's and mine, the Futurist New Deal, that we have a middle-class freedom dividend that provides $1,000 a week to 18 to 63-year-olds, and that's funded through the leasing of federal lands to carbon-neutral companies. And this is something that would add many trillions of dollars to the economy, be an incredible improvement in quality of life for ordinary citizens, be creating many millions of new businesses, allowing people to leave behind wage slavery and make work in favor of starting their own enterprises. This is something that is not recognized in these discussions, and it is an important thing. And we've been able to begin to reach out to Yang supporters, to people who want to continue to carry this message forward, and let them know a little bit about the middle-class freedom dividend and the Futurist New Deal. And we will continue to do that in the coming months. I feel that like the aforementioned Medicare for All Plus, like our e-governance mandate, the iVoting initiatives, iVote USA. These are messages that are important and that are timely. People are ready to hear these messages, and these are messages that are not being conveyed by the mainstream media, by the two-party system, and so we're pleased with the way that we've been able to reach out to people with these messages. So yes, the Andrew Yang basic income to a high degree lives on in somewhat a different form, a form that is in some ways less controversial to economic conservatives because it doesn't raise the tax rate directly to fund this.
Charlie, what have you been doing, and what plans do you have to reach out to Andrew Yang people and tell them that they have a natural home at the USTP only if they knew about it? What the Andrew Yang people are a bit disenfranchised at the moment, and they need to know that they can just come to the USTP, and a lot of their concerns are being talked about and considered.
Oh yeah, well, good news. I mean, Yang is out. That makes the way for Ben Zion. So he he's going to take over that whole freedom dividend universal basic income market. Nobody else in the field right now. Actually, we do have a marketing campaign going on, Ben. With Ben, a picture of Ben standing next to it when he was shaking hands with Yang, and he lists all the points that they have in the commonality of this. So that is something that we're trying to do. It's obviously a high road to get over, but I think this whole concept, it's interesting because I know that Yang isn't considered in the world of Bernie Sanders, except the fact is that a universal basic income ties into almost a socialist policy to an extent. So, at some point, all this stuff's going to have to kind of find a happy medium. Ben's policies are really on point with where I think the future is going to go. So I think we do have an opportunity. And I love the idea that this debate is coming up fairly soon in Chicago, where there's going to be a lot more discussion about this stuff, so people can start to hear these other options that are pretty valid, and they're coming. I mean, you can't pretend that all this isn't happening. That's again why I missed Yang on stage, because he's the only one who generally would talk about automation taking away the jobs, not immigrants. I mean, that has to be pressed into people's minds more and more. It not only exposes the future, but it can lessen this crazy prejudicial attitudes people might have towards, misguided prejudices towards, immigrants that are not the reason that jobs are going. So it'll be interesting to see how everything goes out forward. And again, I wanted to just, plug the debate coming up in Chicago, which is March 4th.
Absolutely,
so
12 days to go.
Away. Yes, and this is going to be, I think, an exciting moment also in the history of these kinds of debates. You can check that out, March 4th, freeandequal.org, and stay tuned for updates from benzion2020.com and others, our friends like Steele. But this is a first of its kind, a primary season a debate of this kind, and Free and Equal has put on many other events of this kind, debates that have been very successful. So we're really pleased to be participating, and really pleased to have been able to support the good work for electoral reform that Free and Equal does. Free and Equal is going to be demonstrating a new product, an iVoting application from Nexus, the app developer, and that's going to be demoed at this event as well. So there's a lot of good work being done on behalf of these sort of techno-progressive outcomes that we've discussed, like e-governance, coming from this group and from this event.
Any final comments there you want to say, Ben, before we run, about the DNC debate, about Andrew Yang, the Yang Gang? What do you? Is there anything else you wanted to talk about before we run?
Yeah, well, I guess just that people, don't believe the hype about the effects of this sort of economic populist groundswell. This is something that's been lacking in the United States political landscape over these last 4 decades, but it's something that is a feature of many a healthy democracy, and this is something that these kinds of reforms, this kind of wresting of control from corporate powers that be, this is not something to be feared. This is something that serves the public good, and we should support it. And we should find ways, as technologists, as transhumanists, to see that those sentiments align with these specific outcomes that we want to see, like e-governance, like I-voting, like a public health service that treats aging as a disease, like these other forms of humane economic policies in the form of a basic income that will prevent these problems that we described from the sort of quote unquote robot apocalypse. This automation removing so many jobs.
Charlie Superman Cam. Is there anything else you would like to say in conclusion about the DNC, about the upcoming Chicago debate, Andrew Yang, about anything you want, sir? And you're looking good in your Superman shirt, sir.
Yeah, that's my super transhumanist shirt, actually. Yeah, no, I think Ben covered a lot of the stuff that I would have said. But one more thing I would want to plug a little bit, although it's a little further on in the future. The Transvision 2020 is coming up, and we have the date set now for August 29th and 30th. It's going to be in Los Angeles at the University of Southern California. And within the debate, within that conference, not only are some of our keynote speakers are going to be like Martine Rothblatt and Ray Kurzweil and such, but we're going to have I'm working on this with co-chairing with Natasha Vita Moore. If you're familiar with her, she's an amazing transhumanist. Anyway, one of the things that we've been talking about is putting together a discussion, one of the discussion panels about the politics of transhumanism, and we're going to have Ben on there, of course, as well as Zoltan, Jose Cordero, and other political experts to talk about how transhumanism is involved in the world of politics and all that. So that ties into to what we've been talking about tonight. So just want to let people know that that's coming as well, and that will be landing before the November elections for president. So it'll be interesting to see where things are at that point. Again, that's August 29th and 30th in LA.
Wow,
and we'll be posting more about that in Facebook.
That's fantastic. Thanks so much, Charlie. I'm really looking forward to that. The Transvision, you've been doing it for a long time now, and they're getting better and better every time. And it's really good to hear that you have Ray Kurzweil coming in, and of course Natasha Vita Moore. Everybody loves Natasha Vita Moore, so that's really good too. Sorry, Ben, you were saying something?
Oh, no. I was just saying that I'm excited, like as you've said, excited for this Transvision 2020 and LA in summertime. Nothing
and it's
better
great.
than
It's
that.
great it's great you got to meet up with Jose Cordero. Obviously, doing a very successful job in Spain. Trying to run for do the European Union jigging. That's very good. Well, thank you, gentlemen. That's very, very good. We'll definitely catch up after the next Democratic debate as well. Hopefully, because this is good fun watching the Democrats fight each other a little bit, and they have to keep fighting each other to try and find out who's the strongest, but also where they're going to consolidate. Who are they going to go with? Are the DNC going to get their way? Or are they going to end up with one of these outsiders? Are they going to end up with a Bernie or a Warren? Either one, it will critically change and alter the Democratic Party from something it is to something it kind of doesn't want to be from the elitist perspective. But, the people, they definitely want a change of scene. And it's very different from the Republicans. So America is veering into an interesting course. And this is an interesting time in American history. It's an interesting time for the United States Transhumanist-Party as well, because the rationale is you just keep plugging, and eventually become that third option. That third option being a smart, stable, secure, humanity-first option that people will want to turn to, that they'll be drawn to because of sound policy and sharp talking points, and the consistency, towards looking towards the future and dealing with current policy changes in order to navigate future issues. Well, thank you so much, gentlemen. It's been fantastic. That's Debt Nation, where we're busy putting death out of business. Thanks, Thrivous. You all know the drill. You've got to go into the description, share the link around, thank Thrivous, throw it in the comments if you want Mr. Cannon to see where you've posted those links. And thanks to I Am Transhuman, David Kelly, as well, for sponsoring this episode. And hopefully you can get yourself some Thrivous. That would be really good. Otherwise, just go and buy some. There's lots of different products there. There's so amazing products there. And your brain will be firing. You'll be sharp and smart. And everything will be better. All right. Well, thank you, gentlemen. That's the USTP news update of the Democratic National Convention in Nevada. Very, very good stuff. Thanks, Charlie. Thanks, Ben, as always. And we look forward to seeing you next time.
benzion2020.com. See you all soon.
Take care.